Hey, Daisy here. I am joined tonight by James Formosa, former Canadian Armed Forces artillery officer. You were released from the Armed Forces, I guess not all that long ago. Maybe you can start off by telling a bit of that story and we'll go from there.
Sure, Chris. Thanks again for having me on. As some of your viewers may already know, I was an artillery officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. I served from April 2017 until the 5th of July 2022, which was my release date, where I was released under the Section 5F, unsuitable for further service from the armed forces because of my refusal to comply with the then active Chief of Defense Staff directive mandating COVID-19 vaccination for serving members of the armed forces. That being said, the language of my release was such that they described my discharge as an honorable discharge, and like a few hundred of my peers that are in the same situation now, the way they describe us is that we have been released due to personal and or domestic problems within our control, and because we've become an excessive administrative burden to the Canadian Armed Forces, chiefly because we've spent, in many of our cases, a few hundred pages worth of correspondence back and forth between ourselves and our chains of command, all the way up to Ottawa at National Defense Headquarters, where we've attempted to demonstrate to the upper leadership in the military that these mandates were unlawful, or they represent what should be considered unlawful or manifestly unlawful orders, which we have a moral duty and responsibility to refuse to obey. It's a responsibility that everyone of every rank in the armed forces must attend to. And any attempt that we've made to explain our arguments, to provide our evidence and our reasons for this, has been met with either no response from the relevant actors in the chain of command, or outright deception, or one of their favorite buzzwords, misinformation, that has not accurately characterized the actual position taken by folks like myself and many other members in groups such as Veterans for Freedom.
Oh yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. So there's the large group like yourself. I was actually speaking to someone too last night who was not released the way you were. It was a reservist, and I mean they made it so difficult on him that he had to leave. So I mean between the numbers you're talking about and people like that, and as well as people still in maybe that are being coerced into things or fearing reprisal, what are the numbers do you think that we're talking about here?
Well, I make the estimates. I'm making conservative estimates now, let's say, but we do know from, especially with regards to folks that are in the exact same position as myself, so those who ended up with a 5F release, there's several hundred of those. The total number of regular force military members who refuse to comply with these directives and mandates is somewhere between 11 to 1,300 individuals. Now, that means that there's still several hundred, at least, that are still in the armed forces, still serving, but many have already reached out to me in the last few weeks to tell me their stories and how they are currently facing persecution, discrimination, segregation, being shunned by their local units and their chains of command, as those local unit commanders attempt to oust these people from their current positions in the military as well, including the sort of cases where, like, somebody, for instance, may have put in a request to be accommodated, like I did, which was, by the way, denied, and that's also why I was released. But there's other individuals who have requested accommodation. They were approved, and then all it took was them, and again, this is a regular occurrence, so it should be no surprise to anybody who knows anything about the military or has family in there, that oftentimes every few years at the minimum you have a posting season where you might move to a different unit, and as soon as some of these folks moved to a new unit, it's as if everything that they fought for in terms of defending themselves and putting in accommodation requests, it all sort of disappears or goes back to zero, and they're right back at the drawing board or back at square one, having to defend their reasons why they should get to keep their career, while also protecting the sanctity of their bodily autonomy, the right to make these choices with regards to their own medical choices, let's say, or even for things that contradict their personal spiritual religious beliefs or the Human Rights Act.
Yeah, so those are a number of ways that maybe you could have I guess had applied, or whatever the verbiage would be, to be exempted from doing this. I think maybe we were discussing at one point that there were some of these things approved, but it was a very select few, I think, eh?
Yes. So recently, and this would be important to let your viewers know as well, myself and James Top from Canada Marches, along with some other volunteers, we met with the Senate opposition leader a little bit over a week and a half ago to provide him a detailed 20-page report on the impacts to not just the armed forces, but healthcare, police, firefighters, in terms of the direct cost to all Canadian citizens by the shortfalls we're now experiencing with a lack of personnel. And for that part, for instance, we already demonstrated a sunk cost of around $800 million for the armed forces alone, just by losing folks like myself. Like to reach my level as a troop commander with all my training and with 5 years in the military, it's getting close to probably at least $1 million in terms of just the equipment, well, in my case, is in the artillery, the ammunition we shoot, how much that costs. And even if we go to disparate examples like special forces helicopter squadron pilots, where with their time in and experience and training, they're worth, on paper at least, $10 million worth of taxpayer money, and that's completely out the window. And you can't even begin to quantify the time and the experience cost losing those people. And to your earlier point as well, about not just the folks that are exactly like us who refuse to comply, refuse to submit to a medical procedure that we don't agree with, or don't agree that we should be coerced or forced to take against our will. For those people, the other people that just, it didn't sit right with their conscience to see the way we were being treated, that also has led to a huge shortfall in our numbers, specifically in the military. Now, an article that we're going to speak to at some point during this show from the Chief of Defense Staff mentions how they're desperate at this time right now to bump up recruiting by something around 5,000 individuals, yet that won't even begin to make up for the impact, because right now, as it stands, over the past year to 2 years, we've got a shortfall of at least 10,000 personnel. And that includes, or that encompasses, quite a few, many hundreds, if not several thousand people who left. They put in their voluntary release paperwork because they were disgusted by what they witnessed with regards to how folks like myself and my peers were treated. At this point right now, but while I was being released from the military, even at my old regiment, there was a bunch of senior NCOs, so this is master bombardiers and sergeants, who put in their quitting papers because they couldn't stomach what was being done to folks like myself. But even now, there's something like over a dozen senior or junior NCOs that just got promoted at my regiment, and almost all of them but one is soon to be quitting, because they do not support, they cannot in good conscience support the ideologically possessed upper echelons of the Canadian Armed Forces at this time.
Yeah, so it's a political organization. That's I mean, you see that. I guess I see it in the posts. I mean, I follow all the branches there on social media and whatnot, and I certainly do see a lot of parades and flags being raised and whatnot. Yes, we could dig into all that. Definitely dig into that one day. But why don't maybe we talk about so people are saying that there's been the article saying it's eased restrictions, perhaps the ones that led to your release. Maybe we want to bring up that article and we can speak to that a little bit.
Sure, I'll share my screen.
Yeah,
for folks.
Yeah, we're in. Oh yeah, perfect. There we go.
So this was just released actually yesterday. So it was on Friday from CBC. So the title, of course, says military eases vaccine mandate, presses ahead with discipline for unvaccinated troops. And I find it so quaint that they describe the Chief of Defense Staff as the top soldier. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The description here at the beginning of the article is as such. It says the Canadian Armed Forces plans to press ahead with the forced expulsion of dozens, that should read hundreds, of unvaccinated troops, despite a new order from Defense Chief General Wayne Eyre on Friday, ending the military's blanket COVID-19 vaccine requirement. In an interview with the Canadian press, Eyre said that this is because service members are expected to follow legal orders and that a refusal by some troops to get their shots, quote, raises questions about your suitability to serve in uniform. Another quote from him, it's dangerous in the military to have legal orders disobeyed, he said. It's a very slippery slope. And that's quite an interesting way to phrase this. It's something that we spoke about a little bit before the start of this show. The main concern here with this that folks ought to know about is the fact, of course, that the entirety of this kind of an argument, especially coming from the Chief of Defense Staff, hinges upon that singular premise that this order, or even to, if we could even first of all characterize it as an order rather than a mandate, which it isn't, but still, if we said it was an order, the whole argument from folks like myself and almost all of my peers that are in the similar position is that we have very good reason to believe that this, even if it were an order, that it is a manifestly unlawful order. And as such, we are actually fulfilling our moral duties and responsibilities as officers and non-commissioned members of the armed forces when we say, I must refuse to follow an order that I believe sincerely to be so manifestly unlawful. And to attest to this fact, actually, as a matter of fact, another quick screen I'd like to share with folks. This comes right from the National Defense Act. So this is just to the Chief of Defense Staff's point on us folks like myself supposedly refusing to follow or disobeying a lawful order. You can see right in here in section 126 of the National Defense Act, and it's regarding refusing immunization, tests, blood examination, or treatment. And it says as follows: every person who, on receiving an order to submit to inoculation, re-inoculation, vaccination, revaccination, other immunization procedures, immunity tests, blood examination, or treatment against any infectious disease, willfully and without reasonable excuse disobeys that order, is guilty of an offense, and on conviction is liable to imprisonment for less than 2 years or to less punishment. So what this really means is if it could be demonstrated that myself or anyone like me was willfully disobeying an order, I should be already serving my 2-year prison sentence right now. However, and this is something that's vitally important for everyone in the audience to take a hold of, and especially if there's anybody watching that's still currently serving in the forces, not a single member, not any one of us that's been 5F released have been charged under the National Defense Act or the Code of Service Discipline. We do not have any sort of these black marks or stains in terms of a crime committed or a willful disobeying of an order. Everything has all been couched through this very weaselly, wishy-washy Marxist doublespeak language of us being unsuitable and being an administrative burden, and in a real sense, you know, this person just writes too much stuff arguing against us and proving his point that we don't want to address, so we're just not going to. And the point really of this just is that if they actually had a leg to stand on, or if the CDS had a leg to stand on here, he could very easily charge me with a service offense, charge me under the National Defense Act, and make me serve my sentence.
So the CDS is Chief of Defense. Yeah. So if there was actually something going on, this is kind of something I've heard the term thrown around kind of with military guys. I've been around since this. Is like that the process is the punishment often.
Right. Absolutely, yes. And a few weeks ago, when I made a video with the Veterans for Freedom podcast with the Ops Sergeant Major Jeff Everly, we went over specifically some TTPs, like tactics, techniques, and procedures for dealing with this monolithic bureaucratic nightmare that is the military chain of command, or especially when you're dealing with the grievance process or anything that would resemble advocating for yourself as an individual in the armed forces, well, in almost all these cases, and it goes back to Jeff's time, which is just, a little just before my generation, but still,
Yeah, a little
nevertheless,
bit.
it's over a few decades we've seen very clearly that if they do not have a procedural or lawful leg to stand on, then they will try their very level best to essentially bury you under the nightmare that is that bureaucratic procedure, so that you are either expelled of all of your funds and financially exhausted, or physically, spiritually, and emotionally exhausted, and you no longer have the will to fight the monolith anymore. But
Yeah.
they underestimated, I guess, some of us folks, that they also trained to
Yeah.
not give up so easily in the face of adversity, and it's kind of coming back to bite them, ironically, now.
Yeah, I think therein lies the problem a little bit. That I don't think that what's being done there in the military necessarily is unique, but the people that they're doing it to are a particular set of individuals that are maybe a little more resilient to such thing.
Right. And
Um,
that's why they're feeling such larger ripple effects now too, when it comes to this retention and recruitment crisis, because I feel a great amount of camaraderie, of course, still with my brothers and sisters still serving, especially those who, let's say, made a certain choice with respect to some private medical information and what they chose to do for their own well-being, not because necessarily it was something that they purely wanted to do, but because they were coerced or threatened, in the sense that they had to make a certain decision, or else they would have to figure out how to feed their families and their children and keep a roof over their head. And these very real survival, the economic realities of survival, have put people in a very tough, almost impossible position. But now that's another moral and spiritual injury upon these people, that have to realize that they were maybe made to do something that they would never have under any other circumstances assented to, but they did it in a moment of pure desperation. And at that point, what are you supposed to do as an individual in that scenario, when you're expected to now trust and believe in your chain of command having your best interest at heart? That's a really hard sell.
yeah, well, when you've been betrayed and aggrieved like that, you're right. You know what? Some people are in different unique positions where, I was already in a position where my business was shut down. I had lost what I had to lose. So that's kind of why I was able to do this, and I'd go work a little bit, going back to it or whatever. But everybody has a different situation. If I could have, I would still be doing my business. I would still be doing probably doing very different things. And with if you have young kids, you have a family, then you have a whole bunch of other concerns too.
Absolutely.
It's not, you can't just necessarily fall on your, like, maybe some people can, but falling on your sword for the sake of falling on it is not necessarily the best move.
Right. And now, and a lot of these folks, I think, are still left in this position of not knowing exactly what it is that they can do to make a positive change or a difference. But I'd like to offer always encouragement to everyone, especially if they feel like they're alone or they don't know where to turn in these regards. Even if you're still, for instance, active duty or serving military, by all means, reach out to Veterans for Freedom. They can reach me at James at veteransforfreedom.ca, I believe it is, because we need to all be working together on this, especially when it comes to holding not just those bad faith actors in the military, but in our political system as well. They need to be held accountable for what they've already done and what they continue to do to people. And that's why I've been in contact with some folks that are still serving, not just from my regiment, but across the country. I'm being reached out to by folks across all of the units from coast to coast, where they would like to have an opportunity in the near future, whenever possible, to provide their direct firsthand testimony to whoever will listen, even if it means listening to the current opponents of the prevailing political class in Ottawa to tell the Conservatives or the PPC or some other party that, at least to our sensibilities now, makes the claim that they support the Charter rights and freedoms of Canadians. Well, there's active serving military folks right now who have a hell of a story to tell, and they are ready and willing and just waiting for the right time to make the presence of this problem known, because it is something that, in no uncertain terms, quite literally has the potential to sink the military once and for all, at least in our country. This is why we're finally seeing, even in these mainstream media articles, people like the Chief of Defense Staff admitting to our political leaders, like the liberal political class in Ottawa, that Russia and China are real existential threats to our way of life, and we are utterly, woefully unprepared for anything resembling a land-based invasion of our country. You name it, anything that would put us in an actual military peer-to-peer or above our standards of a peer conflict. We are simply not ready for it. And everything that the current political class is doing is almost, it seems, by design, tailor-made to make sure that we are as combat ineffective as possible.
Yeah, well, our foreign policy is stirring up hornets' nests all over the world.
Right, and things like this, and I don't claim to be an expert on global geopolitics and how to navigate that mess by any means. However, what I would like to at least throw my hat in the ring for, saying that I know something about, is I do know what it ought to take for us, at least as the Canadian military, what we would need to be effective, at the very least to be combat effective for the defense of our own nation within our own borders. And I'm not giving away any kind of privileged information, because it's pretty much just a matter of not just our public knowledge, but the knowledge of all of our enemies, that we are not ready for whatever might be coming.
Yeah, coming here or abroad, really, I wouldn't think. What kind of deployable force? Like, you would know better than me, but I mean, I know that a number of years ago, man, we were hundreds and hundreds of pilots short in the pipeline.
Right. And one of the things that happens, and this is something that doesn't get captured very often, you won't even see it in a lot of news articles, but this is a phenomenon. Again, if anybody's watching this right now and they're either currently serving or they just got out very recently, or even if they got out a few years ago, what I'm about to say is something that they'll instantly recognize. Essentially what you have going on now, and it's happening at a massive scale. I'll just zoom in on my regiment for an example. Sorry, One Horse, I'm about to narc on you, but this is something that it happened with my combat arms regiment, and I know it's happening at pretty much all the other regiments across the country. Essentially what you have is, let's say there's a yearly training goal, or there's certain like landmarks or benchmarks you need to meet in terms of getting personnel trained, hitting your target objectives, all this sort of stuff. And so what happens is that all gets planned out exhaustively in op orders and on paper to say, this is what we need to do. Then they beg, borrow, and steal in our, grossly under-equipped and underfunded scenarios, try to get as much done as they can physically, realistically, possibly do. And then whenever somebody much higher up comes around, let's say to just check in on things, they'll say, so is everything good to go? And all the people down there that are running around with their hair on fire say, oh, yes, sir, everything's good to go. We're doing great. Everything's awesome, 10 out of 10. And that person higher up doesn't do any due diligence, doesn't look into the dumpster fire that they just walked past. And so then we just keep pushing the buck or kicking the can down the road saying, yeah, everything's fine. We got to the point I'll give as a specific example from my regiment is us telling the higher commander for the whole region that we were ready for a big road move where we're preparing a bunch of vehicles for a convoy, not like the one that was in Ottawa, but just a big road move of military vehicles for a military exercise. And on paper, it seemed as if we had everything good to go and everything ready. But if you were there with your own two eyeballs on the ground looking, you saw that at least half, if not more than half of the vehicles that were on paper good to go, either they weren't even there, they didn't exist, or they were in such a state of disrepair that they wouldn't make it out the door and onto the road. So
they're on blocks. Yeah.
So you have, right, they're on concrete blocks. So you're basically saying, you're passing up to the higher ups like, yes, sir, don't worry, sir, everything's great. Give them a foot rub and a bowl of ice cream, telling them everything's okay. But the actual situation on the ground couldn't be further from the truth. And that's also, again, why you're seeing this further push and this drive to force people out of the forces, because the folks that are left at the pointy end having to deal with all this stuff firsthand, you've got people triple, quadruple hatted doing the job of 3 or 4 what should be 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 separate individuals, but it's one guy doing the whole thing and covering for the rest of them. And then that's happening now at a CAF wide scale. So when it comes to like force generation, let's say for a real conflict, right now, if we had to actually force generate something, let's say even in the infantry, to do a skirmish with a relevant equivalent military force on the ground, if we cannibalized all of our infantry regiments and put them from whatever they are right now into one big mishmash, we could technically force generate like one battle group, which would like give us enough capability to, like, let's say if we're talking about the defense of Canada, you might be able to hold one metropolitan area, like one built up city area with that amount of troops. The rest of the country, you're on your own.
That would be the whole force there.
And that would be the entirety of our boots on the ground,
yeah.
People with rifles in hand, ready to do the business of fighting. And you could defend maybe one city, maybe. But then you don't have any reserves to fill in your casualties.
Yeah, of course. And that problem is only getting worse. It's like the the population bubble. Like there's people in, but if there's no one replacing, and there's people being forced out.
Right.
And I mean, self-eliminating, and they're not being recruited.
Right. And we even now have, like, it was an anonymous letter, but we've got higher level military leaders even reaching out to folks like us and Veterans for Freedom, saying, one of the folks in question, like, he's at least at the level of major, if not like up around colonel, lieutenant colonel level, reached out to us at Veterans for Freedom saying, like, hey guys, just so you know, I'm aware of this too, and I'm kind of freaking out internally knowing that we are utterly blowing past, like, in a negative sense, we're missing all of our marks for recruitment and retention. And this higher level official who's still in right now, the main reason they give for this is that we are not actually appealing to what used to be our target demographic of the kind of folks that were interested in military service, especially for long term, like a lifelong career. And frankly, to put it simply, and this is not to in any case like to denigrate the service of our women in uniform at all, but with the sort of the woke identity politics and the liberal ideological invasion, you might say, into our tactical headspace, if you will, the hell-bent drive to just recruit people that tick certain identity politics boxes, or they have a certain, look in terms of their gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, these immutable characteristics of people. Because we have to fill those quotas, we're not reaching out to our main target demographic of the people that are most likely to even want to join in the first place. And frankly, if you're talking to an audience of people where 80-90+% of them are not interested in joining and never will be anyway, what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish? Because there's no amount. If the only way it is that you can actually appeal to some of these people to bring them in is to fundamentally change the military into something that nobody recognizes any longer, and it serves zero effective function at actually, I don't know, fighting and winning wars, well, then what's the point, really?
The profession of killing, ultimately. It's like get woke, go broke kind of thing. The U.S. military came out with some commercials that were absolutely unreal. And it's like you say, it's if you're appealing to a crowd that is not the people you want to recruit at all, and is generally adversarial to you, why would you change everything about what you are to try to maybe bring in like a fraction of a percent of a fractional crowd?
Right. And then the demographics of folks who, let's say, would be most willing to not just sign up, but they would want to do it for the long haul, like make a lifelong career of service out of this.
I bet they're evil misogynists.
Right. Or you're poisoning the well beforehand and making them no longer see any merit in joining, because why in good conscience would you want to join an institution that very openly essentially says that it hates you and it wants to demonize your very existence? It's not going to appeal to
which is bizarre.
Demographic.
It's bizarre too, because these people that will be demonizing your existence are the ones that are constantly screaming about being demonized and their existences being questioned and all this kind of stuff. when in fact they're the ones doing it to other people.
It's kind of ironic how classic of an example of psychological projection it really
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
You
of the
gotta
highest order.
And you have to remember, right? Like this kind of crowd you mention, the class that we might say that thrives on their persecution complex. As a matter of fact, in the current ideological or political climate, you might say for our nation, they are amongst the chiefly most protected class of individuals of our entire
Entirely protected.
society.
Yeah.
Which I mean, and I'm not saying that that's not necessarily a good thing. It's certainly a good thing for their personal individual benefit. The only real problem, of course, that I like to raise in regards to that is when it comes to the infringement upon the rights of other people or treating other folks that don't fit in that same exact category with the same requisite amount of care and consideration or respect and human dignity. And the expectations here are just it's high time we've gotten to a point where people should forthrightly and proudly sort of stand up to say things that they either do or do not agree with or believe in necessarily in terms of ideological positions, or in the fact that they should not be coerced or forced in any way to make it seem like they support something. And that is something that has been an ongoing issue in our society for well over the past decade, but really in the last 5 or more years is when it's been probably the most of a fraught kind of situation. And that just is to say that because of, let's say that, like, make no bones about it, the liberal elite political class is trying to claim the ownership over our ideological headspace and political maneuvering in this country. And that means that if you do not support what you've just recently called like the get woke, go broke agenda, if you don't support any or all of those ideas or what stems from them, then you will be demonized. You will have your life destroyed. You'll be canceled in the court of public opinion. And that's the nicest way to put it. But what our viewers need to understand, and I know a lot of them already probably realize this, is that canceling you socially or making it so that it's really uncomfortable or almost impossible for you to navigate your social life is a precursor, and it is a pre-genocidal way of thinking. And it should be deeply, gravely concerning to all Canadians from all walks of life, regardless of your background or your immutable characteristics. It's something that everyone should be able to unite under this one banner of realizing that we should not and we cannot want to live in a society that so easily normalizes this idea of othering people and putting them into this scapegoated class where they just deserve all of the political and social persecution that's coming to them. And I know that our audience is well aware of what that looks like. They've experienced it themselves for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's unreal. You know, I've you read about this and you see this canceling stuff online, but I mean, I found myself at a nexus of some absolute unbelievable trolling at one point here, not all that long ago. And I mean, you wouldn't believe the hate, the threats. Like, people were dug up all kinds of crap from my past and were sharing that publicly. Like, it was quite the thing. People were actually tagging stuff in downtown Ottawa that said "F you, Daisy" on it. You know, driving by and like they drove out and then they flipped me off. You know, the bird.
I was there to see a few of those.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but I mean, like, to find like, you know, this stuff exists. Like, I guess, like, I live in the online world kind of because of what I'm doing here, but to actually become part of one of these bizarre scripts and like right in the middle of it, it was unreal.
And yeah, and it was one thing for me to go through all of this, like the intellectual battle, if you will, back and forth between myself and my chain of command that was, to my estimation, blindly and in a very ignorant fashion following unlawful orders and just sort of using the classic excuse that didn't work at the Nuremberg trials, by the way, of I was just following orders, but nevertheless, that's what they did. Nevertheless, that wasn't as malicious, or I never experienced something to the degree of what I was able to see when I was out with you in the last few weeks, with people coming to me and to my face screaming at me and calling me a terrorist. I never thought that would actually happen to me in my life.
Unreal.
Well, certainly not before the last couple of years, but now that it actually has happened, it's made me realize the degree to which the demoralization and the the mental impacts it's had on people in terms of the way that they've become, in a lot of cases, divorced from reality, or if they know what they're doing, it's a very clear and present indicator of their malevolence and their desire to obfuscate the truth.
If they're conscious and know what they're doing, which I mean, I guess at some level of consciousness, that's a deep, that's a pretty
Varying levels. I know it's hard
yeah,
to
but
know.
at some level, I mean, I would think that these people must know to some degree. But I mean, if they know and they're choosing this, man, then you're right, that is malevolence.
Right.
It's actually unreal to see it in like right up in your face and deal with that. What I found so staggering about it was how obvious, like, virtue signaling is always really in your face, but when there's someone with a vehicle and they've got, on one side they've got a BLM, Black Lives Matter flag, and on the other side they've got an Every Child Matters flag, and then that person screaming and yelling terrorist at people in front of a church, deconsecrated or not. And then, like, that woman accused a Black woman and her young son of being white supremacists for being near me because of my affiliation with I believe it was James Topp and some veterans and Veterans for Freedom. Right. And then I just thought that, like, I mean, I guess veterans are people, like, we're all people. But I mean, to be a white supremacist because I'm affiliated with veterans, then to have this other veteran across the street hurling like child like nicknames at me, it's just bizarre world. There's now a multi-platform troll account called Spacey Daisy Media that trolls me.
You're living rent free in their heads now.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, like, I mean, whatever, it's all right. But it's honestly, like, it sounds like I'm talking crazy talk. Like, this would not be possible, but this is my life.
Unless we had it's thankfully we do have a fair amount of video evidence of a lot of this stuff at this point. But like, it's a good thing we do, because if we didn't, it might be hard to get folks like a third-hand account for them to believe us. Like, I know. I well understand. Like, this does sound unbelievable that people would be so either unhinged or willfully deceptive. But that's where, like, it's high time again that we don't beat around the bush. We don't mince our words with these things. Like, I was explaining to my new colleagues at work. That's also to the viewers, if they're wondering where I've been for the last few weeks. I've just been busy. I had to seek alternative employment because I have bills I have to pay. To all those trolls out there who might want to say that I'm grifting, well, if I was that successful, I wouldn't have had to go get a real job by their estimation. But in any case, my new coworkers have been, very kind and generous and understanding, and I didn't make my new place of employment about this. Like, I didn't want to have it affect all areas of my life, but because I'm a open and talkative person, as you know. I told you, right? I told them about some of this stuff, but the main thing that they had to ask for me, and it's no fault of their own either for maybe not paying as much attention to this, or it didn't affect them as personally or deeply as it affected like yourself or me. They still wanted to know, like, well, what is the point of being so, let's say, and this is in a figurative sense, not a literal sense, but figuratively combative against the political system and the government. And I explained to them that the reason why this is so vitally necessary, especially for those folks like myself and my peers that were 5F released, is because we swore an oath, and I strongly, as strongly as I believe in that oath that I swore, I believe in those peers of mine in terms of their belief that they actually had to do what they promised. And if I promised to uphold and defend the citizens of this nation, and that means their charter rights and freedoms and what it means to actually have a Canadian way of life, well, if the greatest threat to that actually happens to be coming from some sources within our own borders, then far be it from me to say that I should be focusing my efforts elsewhere. I really do believe that we have a moral duty and a responsibility as retired members or recently released members, as well as currently serving members, to have the courage of their convictions to openly and unashamedly stand up for what they believe in. And that just means, and it's something that needs to be done with your words. At this point, there needs to be people like yourself and like myself and my peers that have the temerity to say that we are not dealing with simply a matter of overarching governmental incompetence and and a lack of due diligence, but rather this is a clear and present danger. It is an example of malevolent, deceptive and destructive action against not only our forces, but our citizens and our very way of life, the very society that we as Canadians want to live in. And so we have a duty and a moral responsibility to speak out and to stand up and to stand against malevolence and evil and the forces of darkness. And I know that that sounds real extreme, but I wouldn't be saying it any other way if I didn't believe it. So there it is. We got to do what we got to do, and it's the time for pretending that we're dealing with just poor policy decisions or mistakes. We're not dealing with folks, especially if we're talking about the prime minister or his cabinet or any of these policy leaders that are going through the farce that is the Emergencies Act Commission right now. They're not bumbling, incompetent fools. Not truly. What they really are is malevolent, bad faith actors that hate you, they hate me, they hate our way of life and everything that we stand for, and they would want nothing better than to see everything it is that we hold dear stripped away from us and have our lives and our livelihoods destroyed. And I refuse to allow it.
Yeah, they definitely did strip it away from us. And you're right. I mean, there comes time to call a spade a spade. Absolutely. Man, I'm used to hearing you talk, but it's nice to see you fired up a little bit too.
Oh, it's been too long, man. I've been waiting for a chance to do this.
It seems like I might. It's hard to know. I'm on StreamYard, so I don't know if these numbers are coming through right, but I might be being suppressed. But we'll get this out there nonetheless some way.
Absolutely.
Maybe let's just. I'm dying on 2 batteries here, but maybe let's just hit that article and just quickly run through some of the things that they went through just briefly. Might have like about 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe left.
Okay.
Because there was some interesting points to be made through there, I think.
Let's put I'll put this article back up that we were just at. So we just passed the section where the Chief of Defense staff said that it's dangerous in the military to have legal orders disobeyed. One, we've already disputed the claim, first of all, that these were legal orders. And as a matter of fact, the one thing, lo and behold, I would agree with the CDS on this point. It is a very slippery slope, just not in the way that he's imagining. In fact, it's the reverse. It's the reversal. Yeah. So it says here, the comments came as Air released a highly anticipated new vaccine policy that effectively suspends his previous requirement for all armed forces members to be fully vaccinated or face disciplinary action. So it says vaccines will no longer be required for all those serving in uniform, including as a prerequisite for joining the military, but will instead be based on the roles and responsibilities of individual service members. The Defense Chief's new order includes a list of those who still need 2 doses of a Health Canada approved vaccine, with an emphasis on quick response units such as Special Forces and the Disaster Assistance Response Team. There are also requirements based on deployments alongside specific allies or organizations, including those working with NATO or the United Nations, as well as all sailors on warships operating overseas. Quote from the general says, "We've got to remember that a ship out in the middle of the ocean doesn't have access to intensive medical care," Air said, adding that some allies such as the United States and Japan require military members to have vaccines.
So there's a lot there. Yes. So basically, we're gonna change a little bit, but we're gonna include every single member of the military, basically. Mm-hmm. Do people at sea not have access to medical care, state-of-the-art medical care?
Well, I mean, besides having, of course, whatever they have like on the ship, if you need something more extensive, like I'm sure they don't have a surgical suite on the ship.
Okay, maybe not, but then that's the battle group.
And that's why they would have to go to like the nearest port of call. Hopefully it's in a friendly territory or friendly country that they're like a NATO member or something that we have an alliance with of some sort. But that's just to go. That goes to show you right there in terms of when we were first talking before the show, you mentioned how you thought that this was like either it was. I might not be phrasing it exactly correctly, but that it was either a half measure or it wasn't really solving the problem.
It seemed like lip service to me.
Yes, and the reason why it's doing that, especially with what we just went over, is because you might just say, well, okay, You don't have to do the thing that you don't want to do, but the only deployments we're offering to our soldiers right now is to all these NATO and or UN countries where they have a policy that says you have to do the thing for us to even let you in the country. So you basically have hamstrung all of those members by saying, well, you're now beholden to the rules and regulations of all these countries that ain't Canada. You got to do what all these other NATO partners do and all these other UN partners. So even if we were in a better position, let's say, if our political leaders weren't so fully on board with this larger global agenda, if they actually had some courage and didn't force us to, well, they still have this backdoor option essentially by saying, well, all of our friends and friendly countries are doing this, so you got to do it to even be effective or go anywhere.
That's the Trudeau special, is just to abdicate responsibility to somebody else. He got elected promising to legalize weed, then did nothing about it, and the provinces had to handle it. I mean, he does that constantly. I could give numerous examples, but man, one that got me going before the Freedom Convoy was those flags everywhere at half mast for months and months and months.
I think it was nearly 6 months, I believe. That
and they were finally put back up right before, a few days before Remembrance Day. And even then he put that onus on the Indigenous bands. Said, well, I'll put it down when they say I can or should. Who asked for that responsibility or that to be done? Nobody asked for that controversy.
And when I was going to work for those, I was still in the army at the time, seeing the flags at half mast every day. And I had questions from my troops, or a lot of people, the rumor mill is always a buzz everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in the military, any job is like that. But everybody at work was saying like, hey, when are we going to raise the flags up again? And a common, like, sort of a joke, but not really a joke, response that a lot of people were throwing about at the time was something along the lines of like, well, we're keeping them at half mast this long because it's really just getting us ready for the next position of the flag. And the implication was like, it's going to half mast for all these months because the next position is going to be, it gets brought down and it never gets raised again. It's directly as a result, again, from the politicking and the maneuvering by, in this case, Trudeau and the Liberals, to say that we, in a certain very real sense, according to him, we ought to be ashamed of our past, of our culture, of our history and our heritage, there's no such thing as Canadian identity, because he wants us to fully embrace globalism and the destruction of what it is that makes us so proudly and uniquely Canadian, which is a great shame. But it got to such an extent there for those of us still serving at the time, when we were waiting for that. I remember that Remembrance Day, and we were saying like, we hoped to God that they would actually fix it, because we wanted to do a proper Remembrance Day ceremony, which involves you actually have to raise the flag all the way to the top of the mast before lowering it to half mast to do the ceremony for fallen soldiers and things of that sort. So that being said, now, because we've already set this precedent, as long as especially this particular ruling class remains in power, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if some other flavor of the moment or politically expedient reason for moral grandstanding or self-flagellating, Trudeau whipping himself on the back saying that we all ought to hate ourselves for existing, that will cause him once again to lower our flags. And maybe this time it will be for good, and maybe replace it with something that, I don't know, more correctly reflects our allegiance, let's say, to the United Nations or something like that. That's pure speculation, of course, on my part.
Something hammery, maybe, perhaps sickly.
Yes, perhaps that would be very appropriate at the moment, I think.
Yeah, right. Okay, so hundreds. Is there anything else there? I'm just trying to see. I got my. I'm dying on two phones here, so
it says
just try to cut through here.
The defense minister, the new defense minister, Anita Anand, revealed in June that more than 1,100 soldiers had not finished the attestation process, or either they hadn't finished it or they had said no, like in my case, saying, no, I did not choose the thing you wanted me to choose, because it's not up to you to make that choice for me, and you can't force me to do something of that nature anyway. Nevertheless,
1,100.
yes,
So it says 1,100.
it says here the Defense Department says about 300 service members have been told to hang up their uniforms, while another 100 left voluntarily. That being said, like we mentioned earlier in this show, it's closer to several thousand people leaving. Quote, we say with scare quotes voluntarily. They really didn't want to leave, but they left out of pure emotional, spiritual, mental necessity, because they couldn't stomach the way that folks like myself and they were being treated. And it says here, disciplinary proceedings, including warnings and marks on personnel files, have been doled out to hundreds more.
Yeah. So those numbers, especially those first couple, well, I mean, the ones technically forced out, maybe would be far more trackable. But the curve of people that quit voluntarily, type of thing, would be quite the curve. Like, there'd be any number of ways that you just, I'm not going to re-enlist, especially a number of people not re-enlisting, I would think, as well.
Right. Or they come up to the end of their current contract where they have the opportunity to sign on for an additional anywhere from several years up to a full 25-year term. And they just say, no, it's not worth it. I might as well cut my losses.
Well, and then at that point, as far as the military would be concerned, they've invested the most with getting with the least return at that point.
Exactly.
It would be heavily training focused, like almost entirely training focused, I would think. Like, you're not gonna become a super specialist in a couple of years necessarily.
And with this huge shortfall that they're currently experiencing, like we've seen, and folks can do their own research in this regard, because it's very easy to find even mainstream news articles that right now attest to the fact that there's this big push currently in the forces to get an additional 5,000 personnel, like, as soon as possible. But even if they were to, like, tomorrow get 5,000 new recruits right away, we're still 10,000 short. So you haven't even scratched the surface of the problem.
That's enormous.
And to your point with training,
and
like,
the time curve before any of these people would be, I mean, basic training alone, getting them processed and in and through basic training alone, you're already a year out.
Yeah, like the best case scenario, even if, like, people don't get injured or for whatever personal or other external factors need to take time in between their courses, like, life things happen. But even in the best case scenarios where somebody gets in, they do their basic training, and then they do their next few trade related courses, like boom, 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 right after the other, you're still seeing at minimum for almost all these trades, at least 1 complete year's worth of training, just to get them qualified to do the job that they signed up for in the first place.
Yeah, a base level qualification.
Right. And like you said too, like, great. It's great to have you. Welcome to the team, but you are the new guy or the new girl, and you do not have the 20 years of experience that the warrant officer had who just left.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The warrant left. The Sarge left.
It's just all these new folks and none of them know what they're doing.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, maybe I might have to call it a night there, James.
Well,
there you go. Perfect. That's it was nice to catch back up with you. It's been quite a while. Happy to talk to you again. Maybe we didn't get to touch on the emergency measures. The Public Order Emergency Commission, I should say. But maybe if you get a bit of free time, we can jump on again and do this again. It was lovely talking.
Absolutely, and that public inquiry has only just begun. It's already given folks plenty of fodder and food for thought on the way that it's being run. But by the next time you and I get to sit down and have a good chat about these things, I'm sure we'll have loads of material where we could probably do a show just about the Emergencies Act Commission. And I very much look forward to having that opportunity with you in the near future. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to pick your brain about some of that stuff. So we'll do that when you're free. Thanks so much, James.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll talk again soon. All right, so that's Daisy and James Formosa, former Canadian Armed Forces Artillery officer, out.